Okay, you guys ready? Anyone to share? All right, let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to this invited session on science and religion. Are they compatible? Today we have two very distinguished speakers who will be trying to answer that question. Professor Alvin Plantinga from the University of Notre Dame will be the main speaker, and the commentator will be Professor Dennett from Tufts University. I think the format we'll use is we'll give the speakers about an hour to go at it, and then we'll open it up to questions. This is about a half hour for questions and answers. So the main speaker today, Professor Plantinga, the title of his talk is Science and Religion, Where the Conflict Really Lies. Join me in welcoming.
Thanks very much, Bill. Is this microphone working? Okay. Science and Religion, Where the Conflict Really Lies. That's the title. Our question is this: are science and religion compatible? A useful project would be to try to make this question more precise. What is religion? What is science? What is incompatibility? And in what varieties does it come? There is explicit contradiction, implicit contradiction, contradiction in the presence of plausible assumptions, improbability of conjunction, and the like. Some claim that theism itself is inconsistent, in which case, naturally enough, it will be incompatible with science and everything else. Others retort that the same goes for science. Current general relativity is incompatible with current quantum theory, so that current science itself is inconsistent, in which case it is incompatible with religion and everything else. These are good topics, but they'll have to wait for another occasion. Here I'll assume that we have at least a pretty good rough grasp of the question. I won't be talking about religion generally, but about specifically theistic religion, and in particular Christian belief, but the Christian part will be less important than the theistic part. When I speak of Christian belief, I'm thinking of C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, something like the intersection of the great Christian creeds. So although what I say is explicitly concerned with Christian belief, it will also be relevant to many varieties of Judaism and Islam. Why I think there is conflict here? Many suggestions have been offered. Theistic religion, for example, theistic religion endorses special divine action in the world, miracles, for example. But such action would contradict the laws promulgated by science. Another example, there is such a thing as a scientific worldview, and it is incompatible with theistic religion. Christian belief implies that human beings have been created in God's image, but contemporary evolutionary theory, properly understood, implies that neither God nor anyone else has designed, planned, or intended that human beings come to be. Evolutionary psychology is full of theories that are incompatible with theistic understandings of human beings. Some scientific biblical scholarship argues that historical claims of Christianity, for example, that Jesus rose from the dead, are false, or anyway groundless. These are all of great interest, but I'll limit myself on this talk to a cluster of issues having to do with evolution. I'll argue, 1, that contemporary evolutionary theory is not incompatible with theistic belief. 2, that the main anti-theistic arguments involving evolution together with other premises also fail. 3, that even if current science, evolutionary or otherwise, were incompatible with theistic belief, it wouldn't follow that theistic belief is irrational or unwarranted or in any other kind of trouble. And finally, 4, that naturalism, the thought that there is no such person as God, as the God of the theistic religions, or anything like God, is an essential element in the naturalistic worldview, which is a sort of quasi-religion itself, in the sense that it plays some of the most important roles of religion, and I'll argue that the naturalistic worldview is in fact incompatible with evolution. Hence there is a science, or quasi-science, religion conflict, all right, but, there is a science and religion or quasi-religion conflict, all right, but it's a conflict between naturalism and science, not between theistic religion and science. So, part 1, contemporary evolutionary theory is compatible with theistic belief. The term evolution covers a variety of theses. There is the ancient earth thesis, for example. There is the thesis of descent with modification. That is the thought that the enormous diversity of the contemporary living world has come about by way of offspring differing, ordinarily, in small and subtle ways from their parents. There is the common ancestry thesis, the claim that, as Gould put it, there is a tree of evolutionary descent linking all organisms by ties of genealogy. I'll use the term evolution to refer to the conjunction of these three theses. There's also, 4, the claim that the principal mechanism driving this process of descent with modification is natural selection. Natural selection winnowing random genetic mutation. Since a similar proposal was characteristic of Darwin, he said natural selection has been the main but not exclusive means of modification. Call this thesis Darwinism. So that's the 4th thesis. Now it's clear, I think, that there's no conflict between theistic religion and the ancient earth thesis, or the descent with modification thesis, or the common ancestry thesis. According to theistic belief, God has created the living world, but of course he could have done so in many different ways, and in particular in ways compatible with these theses. What about the 4th thesis, Darwinism? Is it incompatible with theistic religion? Many apparently think so. Among them are Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, seated here to my left, George Gaylord Simpson, and many others. And far to the other side, Philip Johnson. But are they right? Where exactly would such an incompatibility arise? A suggested source of conflict has to do with the Christian doctrine of creation, in particular the claim that God has created human beings in his image. This requires that God intended to create creatures of a certain kind and planned that there be creatures of that kind, rational creatures perhaps, with a moral sense and the capacity to know and love him. It requires that God intended to create creatures of such a kind and then acted in such a way as to accomplish this intention. This claim is clearly consistent with evolution, those first 3 theses, as conservative Christian theologians have pointed out as far back as 1871 with Charles Hodge at Princeton. But is it also consistent with Darwinism? It looks as if it is. God could have caused the right mutations to arise at the right time. He could have preserved populations from perils of various sorts, and so on. And in this way, by orchestrating the course of evolution, he could have ensured that there come to be creatures of the kind he intends. Now, what is not consistent with Christian belief, however, is the claim that evolution and Darwinism are unguided, where I'll take that to include being unplanned and unintended. What is not consistent with Christian belief is the claim that no personal agent, not even God, has guided, planned, intended, directed, orchestrated, or shaped this whole process. Yet precisely this claim is made by a large number of contemporary scientists and philosophers who write on this topic. There is a veritable choir of distinguished experts insisting that this process is unguided, indeed sometimes insisting that it is part of evolutionary theory itself, the contemporary evolutionary scientific theory of evolution itself, to assert that it is unguided, so that evolutionary theory as such is incompatible with Christian belief. According to George Gaylord Simpson, for example, man, and no doubt woman as well, is the result of a purposeless and natural process that did not have him in mind. In this connection, the late Stephen Jay Gould and others have emphasized what they take to be the chancy, contingent, and undirected character of evolution. If the evolutionary tape were to be rewound and then let go forward again, the chances are we'd